To build a multiracial democracy, Race Forward needs your support. Join us in dismantling structural racism. By texting RFPOD to 44321, you can help us make more episodes about important racial justice conversations. Support by donating $24 in 2024, a pivotal year for our work together. All donations are tax deductible. Again, support our work by texting RFPOD to 44321.
Welcome to the Season 5 premiere of Momentum, a Race Forward podcast. I'm Cathy Albisa, Vice President of Institutional and Sectoral Change here at Race Forward. The most recent statistics indicate that Latinos represent about 19% of the U.S. population and account for 36.2 million eligible voters nationwide. Of those numbers, California is home to 8.5 million eligible Latino voters, which represents over 30% of the electorate. Big news happened this past December when Julián Castro, former U.S. Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, former mayor of San Antonio, and former 2020 presidential candidate, was appointed the new CEO of the Latino Community Foundation, whose mission looks to build a movement of civically engaged, philanthropic leaders investing in Latino-led organizations and increasing political participation of Latinos in California. In his welcoming statement, Secretary Castro reflected on the importance of the moment. America's destiny and the destiny of Latinos are intertwined like never before. Latinos represent 19% of our nation's population, the fastest-growing racial and ethnic voting group, and a $2 trillion engine of our national economy. We're in the driver's seat of America's future. But to unlock the full potential of Latino communities and our nation as a whole, we must invest more in Latino and Latina-led organization. My vision is for the Latino Community Foundation to fund a national movement of Latino power building that results in a more inclusive and equitable America. Throughout his 2020 presidential campaign, Secretary Castro's platform was hailed as progressive and inclusive. The issues that were front and center included systemic racism, immigration reform, the subject of reparations, climate change, police reform, and protection for trans women of color, amongst other issues. Notably, since the 2020 campaign, Secretary Castro has been an outspoken critic of former President Trump's policies, as well as current President Joe Biden's policy, specifically on immigration. Secretary Castro is also a current political analyst and guest anchor for NBC, SMBC. He was also a podcast host for the podcast Our America with Julián Castro, which ran for 2 years from 2020 to 2022, where he and his co-host, Sawyer Hackett, help listeners understand how to make sense of the non-stop stream of headlines that affect our daily lives. On this episode of Momentum, Secretary Castro shares his vision for the Latino Community Foundation and how he is working to build Latino Latinx economic power and political power, his thoughts on housing policy and necessary steps to ensure this country has a racially equitable and just housing system, and the state of the Latino Latinx vote leading into the 2024 election. Welcome, Secretary Castro, to Momentum, a Race Forward podcast.
Thank you so much.
I want to start by just offering congratulations for your appointment as the CEO of the Latino Community Foundation. This is very encouraging for all of us. I hope you know that in the world of racial justice, you are a household name and an inspiring one at that. Your career, your leadership, your clarity is something we are all very grateful for. And for our listeners, the Latino Community Foundation's focus is rooted in the intersection of philanthropy and building Latino community power. So my first question for you, Secretary Castro, is I've read about your history, but not everyone listening might have. I know you have a family steeped in activism and belief in change and in community. What you're calling others to do is what you have done yourself. You have been bold. You have been consistent. You have stood your ground with integrity on the things that matter to you and should matter to the whole country. So I would like to ask how you came to be who you are in this work.
Oh, my mom and my grandmother. I mean, I grew up with these two very strong women. My grandmother had come over from Mexico when she was 6 or 7 years old because she lost her parents in Coahuila, came to San Antonio with her nearest relatives, never finished elementary school, and she worked as a maid, a cook, and a babysitter, serving others in that way, and raised my mom as a single parent. My mom flourished differently from my grandmother. My mom graduated from high school, eventually graduated from college, and then went to graduate school. And during all of that was a hellraiser. She was a Chicana activist fighting to try and improve conditions in the west side of San Antonio, a very Mexican-American community. And as a Chicana activist, my mom instilled in my twin brother Joaquin and me this burning sense of responsibility to not only do well for ourselves, but to go and make sure that others can do well too. And that you have to use part of your talent and your time, your ability in some way to lift up others. And the way that I did that so far for most of the time was through politics and public service on the city council, as mayor, as secretary of HUD, and running for president. The great thing about the Latino Community Foundation is I see the same values there that I saw in my mom and what she taught my brother and me. I see that in the work that LCF is doing, and that's why I'm so excited to channel my energy and my creativity and my commitment to equality and bettering the Latino community into this work. And it's even better that, we're a staff of about 20. I see that in all of the team members at the Latino Community Foundation. I mean, we have folks who are dreamers. We have folks who are immigrants themselves, and then also third or fourth generation on our staff, the whole Latina and Latino American experience. And they put that heart into all of the work that we do. That encourages me. It gives me a lot of hope that we can make a difference.
Secretary Castro, it seems to me that your grandmother, your mother, and yourself have been serving others profoundly, and we are grateful and honored to have you. Can you tell me more about your vision for the foundation's work?
I'm about 5 months into the job. I started at the beginning of the year. For those that don't know, the Latino Community Foundation is the nation's largest Latino serving foundation. It's based in the Bay Area and is a statewide California foundation, and it's been that since 2016. My vision is to go deeper into places in California, whether it's the Central Valley or the Inland Empire or the Imperial Valley, that have traditionally been underinvested in, and then also to expand the work of the foundation nationally in the years to come, beginning with Arizona and Nevada. But if I could back up for just a second, our mission is to unleash the civic and economic power of Latinos and Latinas. And we do that by investing in grassroots power building through organizations that get out there and educate Latino and Latina voters and mobilize them to go exercise their right to vote. We do that through investing in economic justice and opportunity work that nonprofits are doing throughout the state of California. And then we also do that by trying to cultivate the largest network of Latino and Latina philanthropists. We administer 17 giving circles throughout the state of California. That's how we're making a difference. And in the years to come, I want to make sure that we continue to make a big difference within California, and then also take that work into states whose demographics look a lot like California, Arizona, Nevada, my home state of Texas, and so many others.
That sounds pretty exciting. Let me go a little deeper on the question of economic power. As you already know, of the many disparities our Latino communities face, wealth disparities are amongst the most persistent. I'm sure you saw the 2023 Brookings Institute report, where the wealth gap of Latino, Latinx households is 5 times lower than the average, with most prominent disparities in the state you're working in, California, and in the state I'm living in, New York, where white households can hold up to 40 times the wealth. So you've talked a lot about building economic power, about investments. How do you see the foundation's work tackling wealth inequities at this systemic level?
It's a great question. I see it by the work we're doing to invest in groups that are trying to change policy and also draw down investments into Latino neighborhoods that make a difference. The organizing groups that we've supported in California in the last few years have leveraged upwards of $700 million that's been drawn down from federal dollars, infrastructure dollars, the Inflation Reduction Act dollars, and similar federal outlays. So that's part of it, making sure that the community gets investments in infrastructure, in education, in public health, and any number of other areas where that sparks opportunity and helps that gap. And then also, we support entrepreneurship, the ability of Latinas and Latinos to start their own businesses, to be able to grow that business. We support organizations that are helping people who have an idea and want to start a business. And then also organizations like LBAN, which is out of Stanford, that helps established Latino-owned and Latina-owned businesses grow from at least $1 million in revenue to well beyond that. I guess the best way to say this is that when it comes to that wealth gap, we're attacking it in different ways that we feel overall will make a contribution to decreasing it.
Thank you. Because you can see those gaps, right, in almost every system, the ones you mentioned, education, public health, as well as small businesses. You also noted the public investments. They are historic. They are important. How does the leveraging work?
Well, in our case, as a community foundation, I see this dual role that we have. Of course, we put dollars into organizations that are doing good work at the grassroots level. That also means that we should be rooted in community, understanding the needs of the different communities throughout California and then eventually throughout the nation that we serve, understanding what types of policies should be advocated. How do you shift power? How do you close that racial wealth gap through policies on housing, on education, on economic development that speak to the needs of the Latino and Latina community? That's how I'm thinking about it. And I'm excited about the kind of work that we've been doing and also the kind of work that we're going to get to do. Just one quick example of that. Recently, Governor Newsom hosted a philanthropy summit. This is an annual summit that he hosts. And at his philanthropy summit in late April, the Latino Community Foundation agreed to take the lead role in building up the capacity of community-based organizations in the Imperial Valley to be able to ensure that as all of the lithium mining happens in that area, in Southern California, not far from the border, the main area is Imperial County that is 86% Latino, made up of about 7 cities, the largest of which is probably about 40,000 people. We want the wealth that is created there through that lithium mining to benefit the residents and lift up the quality of life when it comes to housing affordability, public education, public health, transit, all of those things that go into a great quality of life. And federal dollars that are leveraged help people get ahead economically and live a better life.
Thank you. I'm going to shift to a topic that always comes up when we're talking about Latino communities, which is immigration. There are some who do not seem to think that our communities deserve all the good things that you just listed, that as immigrants or children of immigrants, we are not part and parcel of the U.S. in the same way as others. You have been one of the clearest voices on immigration policy on the political stage, whether it was in 2020 when you were a presidential candidate, or today, where it continues to be a significant political issue in the presidential race. We know we've had some successes like DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, but also a lot of failures, right? A lot of soul-shattering separations of children from parents, images we cannot forget, with lifelong impacts, human beings who immigrated being housed in cages, large-scale deportation, and busing people to sanctuary cities without the people or the city knowing, an obvious use of people as pawns in a political game. So what's your assessment of where we are in the immigration debate today, how it impacts our communities, and an issue that's dividing even people of color? And how do we move from here to the needed pathway to citizenship, respect for asylum seekers, and for those seeking a better life?
Yeah, we're caught in a darker era right now where it's become politically fashionable to denigrate migrants, where the former president has moved the so-called Overton window in terms of policies that many people are willing to accept, that are crueler, that are more anti-immigrant. I believe that Americans ought to be reminded and aware of the value of immigrants to our country. And the contributions that both documented immigrants and also undocumented immigrants have made to the United States. And we saw this in spades during the pandemic. I mean, who were the people working in the fields? Who were the folks in the construction industry, in meatpacking plants, and so many other different industries? There were a lot of American citizens there too in some of those industries, but there are also a lot of undocumented immigrants keeping the country going and risking their own health and sometimes their lives to help put food on the table, to help ensure their local economies were still running. And that story is as true today as it was back then. The truth is that in so many ways, we need the contributions and the presence of people who are documented and then people who are undocumented, who have been working hard, who have been making a contribution to the country. I don't think that we've been reminded as a nation about that enough in these last few years. I think that both parties have given in to a darker version of who migrants are. And unfortunately, this version is racist and it's counterproductive to the success of the United States in the long run. My hope is that more voices will come forward with a positive plan on immigration, particularly after this election, that we have an orderly system at the border that, of course, manages the influx of people, but also is compassionate and humane instead of being cruel. And that for the long run, we find a way to reform our legal immigration system so that we take in more people through the legal immigration system. We clear the backlog of folks who need their asylum claims adjudicated. And we can really benefit from all of the energy and the creativity and the work ethic of people from around the world, even as the United States ages and it sees a birth rate that continues to go down and down. And that means that whether you talk about the Social Security Trust Fund or the need that industries have for workers, these folks are very necessary to our future. They ought to have a role in it.
But isn't that exactly the birth rate going down, growing population of Latinos? Isn't that exactly what some on the far right are using to stoke fears? As you mentioned, the discourse is being seen through a prism of racism, also scarcity, as if there weren't enough for all of us. It is part and parcel, right, of the challenge to whether we're going to have a multiracial democracy. So I'd love your thoughts on how you see the immigration conversation relate to the growing conversation of the crisis of democracy and the challenge to multiracial democracy.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that there are a good number of voices, and certainly the former president being the best example of that are trying to use the issue of immigration as a wedge. Voices that are trying to create a lot of fear, ideas like this replacement theory that are stoking division and using the idea of immigration to try and gain support by making people afraid. The thing is, it's not based in reality, but it's going to prevail. That narrative prevails if there's not enough pushback. And they have to be brave enough and they have to have enough foresight, and now I mean politicians, in order to push back, even when it sometimes can seem politically difficult to do that. Because if you don't push back, then the narrative just keeps getting darker and darker and darker, and the racial animus is more acceptable. That's not a direction that we want to go in if we want to have a thriving democracy in the years to come.
Even silence is complicity. Thank you for encouraging us all to push back. I'm going to move to an issue that is real, which is housing prices and high rents. We're facing a historic affordability crisis in housing. Rumor has it this is an area you know well across the country, despite the fact that in the larger scheme of things, we actually have more empty homes than unhoused people. But the affordability crisis is threatening even the fabric of many communities. If you were in the role today as Secretary of HUD, based on your past experience, what you've learned, what would you be doing? What would you be advising current housing leaders to be doing?
Advocating, making sure people understand the depth of the crisis that exists in so many parts of the country, both big cities and smaller towns. The challenge for our country has been there really hasn't been the kind of resource commitment to creating housing opportunity that there ought to be, probably at least since the late 1970s. In many ways, we've walked away from public housing. There are thousands and thousands of people in many cities on the waiting list for vouchers. You have the advent of any number of different factors that make housing more expensive, both to buy and to rent. And in the face of all of that, the federal resources coming down the pike just don't match the scope of the problem. It's not only a federal government problem, but the federal government, I think, has the biggest role to play in creating more housing affordability. So my advice would be to just keep banging the drum on the importance of that and make it a priority in each budget to allocate more resources to housing opportunity. Because a lot of times we know what works, we know what has created more affordable housing units, we know what has brought down the numbers of homeless individuals in communities. We saw that in the Obama administration, where veteran homelessness fell by 47% between 2010 and 2016 because President Obama made that a very clear goal and then worked with mayors and governors around the country to prioritize investing in vouchers and a system that provided housing for unhoused veterans. Well, we can do that when it comes to families. We can do it when it comes to youth. And we can also tackle the larger affordability challenges through low-income housing tax credits and through some of our traditional funding, and with the help of the private sector as well.
47% is a significant number. When we set goals we're serious about, we can achieve them. But how far are we? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. What kind of investment, what's the number that you think we should be dedicating to the housing crisis today?
It's a big number. In the initial version of what was then titled Build Back Better, folks will remember at the beginning of the Biden administration that ultimately became the Inflation Reduction Act, but was a much smaller investment than had been initially proposed. There was about a $300 billion investment in housing opportunity that was across the board, from tax credits to direct dollars to other incentives, but about $300 billion over, I believe, 10 years or so. It's on that scale, if not more. It's going to take almost a kitchen sink approach to creating more units, but then also making the housing market more accessible to people. That's the kind of work that I think needs to be done. And there are states that are investing more than others. Today, I have a front row seat to what Governor Newsom is doing in California. Over the last few years, they've run a series of ballot measures to raise money to put into affordable housing. That helps a lot. It's better than not doing anything. So when states combine with the federal government, combine with the nonprofit and the private sector, then perhaps you can start to make a dent and create more housing opportunity for people at an affordable level.
We also know here at Race Forward that housing justice is also racial justice. It is a deeply racialized system. But rather than holding firm on racial equity and racial justice after the uprising, many of the institutional stakeholders, including philanthropy, have started to waver. You, in your new role, co-authored a piece with Stacey Abrams titled "It's Open Season on Civil Rights. Philanthropy Must Not Retreat." It's a firm call from both of you to stand strong, to finish the work that was begun, to not let the window of opportunity close. What would you say to your fellow leaders in philanthropy who are wrestling with the choice of being quiet and cautious at a time of severe and sometimes significantly threatening backlash, or standing firm and clear and possibly making themselves a target of some of the anti-democratic forces in our country?
Well, now is the time to be bold. We know how high the stakes are. We know that whether it's the racial wealth gap or issues related to our criminal justice system that we saw around the murder of George Floyd, or issues related to representation, on each of those scores, the challenges are as deep today as they were when so many of the foundations and so many of the corporations made their vocal commitments in 2020 and 2021 to racial justice and equity after the murder of George Floyd. That has not disappeared. It has not dissipated substantially in these 2 or 3 years. The need is still there. And there is a whole cadre of folks who are very cleverly trying to use the legal system to stretch the bounds of the affirmative action case, the Harvard affirmative action case, that severely cut into the ability of higher education to utilize race as a factor in admissions. They want to extend that to the ability of foundations to be able to invest in nonprofit organizations that have a focus on a particular community of interest, racial or ethnic community. They're trying to create a chilling effect because there's not a court out there that has actually sided with them on this point of law that has extended what the Supreme Court did to the world of foundations or this type of endeavor. But what they're banking on is that boards of directors at foundations and at companies are going to get scared, that they're going to get chilled into not making those necessary and timely investments in pursuing racial equity and justice. And, I wish I could say that there's been no success there, but I think it's true that some boards of directors, some foundation CEOs have been moved by that. They are afraid of it. And the point that Stacey Abrams and I were making was now is the time to be bold and to push back and not to give in to that fear-mongering. To be smart, for sure, to understand what the potential risks might be as these court cases are heard in different circuits across the country, but not to shrivel because of that concern. So that's my hope. My hope is that more CEOs and more boards of directors will maintain a commitment to their DEI work and will stand strong in the face of what is clearly a coordinated effort to eliminate these types of initiatives in all facets of life, not only in higher education, but in charitable work and in company hiring and recruitment and retention policies as well.
We are certainly in a much more combative age than during the Obama years, and threats, legal, some physical, harassment, pressure, we're seeing it across the board. And what I'm hearing from you is bold on immigration, bold and big on housing, bold and firm on racial justice and equity. This is not the time to be meek or to be cautious. Too much is at stake. And speaking of that, there is a presidential election coming up where many would say that there's quite a lot at stake, starkly different visions, a crossroads. Yet despite how much is at stake, you have noted, with some criticism of both parties, that Latino voter engagement has been underwhelming at best. Although we will constitute 15% of eligible voters, a record high. Although Latino voters are showing what some might say is a more authoritarian bent than in the past, and many would argue voting against our own interests. So what is happening to and within our communities, and how do we educate and engage in ways that enable Latino communities to become full participants in the democratic process with all the tools, all the insight and the knowledge they need? And I know this is a big focus of the foundation, so I'm very excited to both hear your thoughts and see how your work continues to unfold.
Well, you're right. I mean, this is sort of the bread and butter of what we're up to in 2024, where we just did our first round of grant making and invested $800,000 into 19 organizations that are doing civic engagement work to educate and to mobilize Latina and Latino voters throughout the state of California. And for the first time, we invested dollars as well into Arizona and Nevada, because we believe that who becomes president, who wins the presidency, and then which party controls Congress is going to run right through the Latino community. If you think about it, there are 5 congressional districts in California that are very competitive. There aren't that many around anymore that are really our swing districts. It could go either way, but 5 of them are there in California. So that could well determine which party controls Congress. It could determine whether the election gets certified. And in the presidential race, Arizona and Nevada, both states that have large Latino population, are battleground states. Those electoral votes are going to be contested by both parties. They were both won by Joe Biden in 2020. The numbers right now in both of those states are fairly close. We're a nonpartisan organization. We do 501c3 work, so we don't endorse a specific candidate or specific party, but we do have an interest in the Latino community being well informed and getting out to vote, and ultimately having a say in the kind of policy that comes out of whoever is the elected official in their office. We want to make sure that the number of registered Latinas and Latinos and then people who actually turn out is much higher than it was in 2020.
But turnout is only part of the equation, right? The poll that the Latino Community Foundation released actually said that a majority of Latinos do not feel well informed of both major candidates' policy agendas. How do we plan to tackle that challenge? Not just showing up, but showing up with a deep understanding of what's at stake.
It's a very real thing that a lot of folks in our community don't feel as though they have the information that they need to make an educated choice in November. That's why, we're enthusiastic about putting dollars into organizations of people who are reaching out to the community in different ways, whether it's block walking or doing that digitally. We also support, for instance, Radio Bilingüe, which has a presence not only in California and Arizona and other southwestern states, and also newer immigrant and farm worker communities. So we're trying to do our part to make sure that we close that gap and that by November, people feel better informed about their choice in the election. I think the lesson here, though, is this is why it's necessary to support organizing 24/7, 365 days a year. You can't just do it, a few months before the election. It's also one of the reasons that I'm excited about the kind of infrastructure that the Latino Community Foundation provides in addition to dollars for people to go out there and educate voters. We're not just concerned about the election cycle. We're investing in groups that are pursuing greater economic opportunity, economic justice, leveraging these federal dollars to invest money in infrastructure in neighborhoods and services in neighborhoods. These giving circles that we administer, right? There are people within those communities that are raising their own money, giving their own money to organizations doing great work in their neighborhoods. So we're not waiting in that sense for big philanthropy or for others to save us. We're also working at it ourselves to make a difference in our communities. It's that kind of kaleidoscopic, full-throated approach that I think is needed to change things so that people are better informed. They feel like they're more a part of our democracy, like they have something at stake. They're going to be more likely to actually go out and vote at every election.
Democracy is 24/7, 12 months a year.
That's true.
Secretary Castro, thank you so much for joining us. We will be watching your endeavors and supporting them and look forward to having you back.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us for the season premiere of Momentum, a Race Forward podcast. We want to thank Secretary Castro and the Latino Community Foundation for making this episode possible. Make sure to follow Race Forward on social media, on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter/X. And to support our work, make a donation by texting RFPOD to 44-321. That's RFPOD to 44-321. Until next time, let's keep the momentum going.